Hi everyone, and welcome to the second week of the 21st Century Teachers Award. Okay, well done to those of you who last week managed to get the time to access some research on different learning theories which are connected to online and blended learning, and who managed to post their research links up onto our class Padlet. If you haven't yet got that far, don't worry, you can still access a Padlet. It will be live throughout the duration of the course, so you can just click on the link, go in there, have a look at what other people have posted, and add to that as time goes on. Hello everybody, this week we're looking at open educational resources and virtual learning environments. Now we're going to have a look at this over the next 2 weeks, and this week we're just going to have a look at the potential, so basically what can they be used for, of virtual learning environments and open educational resources. And then we're going to extend that a little bit further on the OER front and have a look at how an open educational resource can be useful in a named specialist area. Right then, so by now, all of us on this course will be okay with at least the basic functions of using Moodle. Now, Moodle is a good example of a virtual learning environment because it's a system that we use to deliver learning materials to students via the web. So of all the tools in there, we can ask for collaboration, we can ask students to upload their work in there, we can put documents in there for students to access, we can put different kinds of media in there, i.e. YouTube videos and other videos from places like ClickView and Office 365 video. We can also put sound files in there. Now all of these together enable us to provide an entire learning environment for our learners. So like I said, commonly used VLE, the most prolific across the world is Moodle. We use Moodle across both colleges, and many colleges and university right across the world choose to use Moodle. Blackboard is used most often in universities, and unlike Moodle, you have to pay for Blackboard, which means the take-up is less. And also, we can class new cloud-based tools like Google Classroom and OneNote Class Notebook as virtual learning environments, although often these don't have the same range of tools as something like Moodle. So for example, you can share work in there and you can ask students to collaborate, but they haven't got the same kind of functionality. So for example, you might be able to embed media, but you probably won't be able to add a plugin, say, to turn it in so that you can check students' work for plagiarism. Now, obviously, the benefits of using a virtual learning environment for students are quite large. Remember now that part of our job is not just to educate learners, it's also to get them ready for work, and independence and being able to be an independent lifelong learner is very much part of our aims. So in terms of the general benefits of using something like Moodle, obviously we have that easy sharing of resources, the fact that you can place a document in Moodle and then learners can access it time and time and time again, the fact that they don't lose it, the fact it doesn't just dwindle in the bottom of their college bag is a huge bonus. Many virtual learning environments contain assessment tools. Now, you can get creative with assessment in something like Moodle because you don't need to use, say, an assignment upload or a quiz. You could also use things like discussion forums to assess learning as well. Collaboration spaces, learners can upload work and get feedback. Different media types can be embedded. All of these are huge benefits. Again, remember, I know there was discussion on the initial Padlet activity about whether or not this idea of learning styles is valid or not. Well, whatever you think in terms of that, it doesn't really matter because in Moodle, you have the ability to put different media types in to cater for different learning styles, okay, even if you're not actually planning for that purpose. So the fact that you can include text documents and quizzes and video and sound caters to all learning styles naturally. In terms of collaboration, some virtual learning environments lend themselves better to this than others. So for example, in Moodle, you can create a Moodle wiki, which allows students to work together to create content and then link it all together so they've got one big resource. Likewise, in OneNote Class Notebooks, you can provide students with a collaboration space where they can work together in real time, which is good and allows them to work on group projects. With Google Classroom and Office 365, you can ask students to work in the same document together at the same time so that they can complete their work. Right, now in terms of limitations and barriers, you will all know, as I know, that all of this, any kind of blended learning or online learning delivery, requires time on your part as a teacher to learn how to use the system and create lesson activities efficiently. Some systems are much easier to use than others. So for example, something like Google Classroom is dead simple to learn how to use, because all you need to do is click, 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 and link to the stuff in your Google Drive, and it essentially does it all for you. Whereas Moodle takes quite a lot more time. It's fairly straightforward to put a document into there, but it's not quite as easy to actually use it in the classroom in a blended learning environment, and as such we find at Bourneville and at Southend City that it tends to get used mainly as a repository for documents. Selecting the most appropriate tool to use can be difficult, so sometimes we'll need help, advice and guidance on, should I use an assignment upload for this, should I use a discussion forum for this, could I put this into a quiz? And sometimes, especially in Moodle, the range of tools can be so vast that it can be quite confusing to somebody who's just starting out with this. As a couple of people in last week's activity mentioned, issues of understanding copyright can be a bit of a minefield. I have posted a document up in response to Joseph in week 3 activity if you want to have a look at that, because it's true, and for educational purposes most things can be used or shared with students in some ways. Okay, so it might mean you might not necessarily be able to take lots of photocopies from a book and post them into the VLE, but you can link to websites with the same information on. Okay, I'll post something up that everyone can have a look at just to clarify some of these issues with copyright. One thing I find with Moodle in particular in my own courses is that without managing it really carefully and taking time to make sure everything is in the right place, sometimes the look and feel can become really messy, and students and learners find it difficult to locate the resources they're after unless you manage it very carefully and you add context to the resources. One of my big bugbears when I look through Moodle courses here is just lists and lists and lists of Word documents and PDFs with no labels attached to tell students what's in them. Okay, again, it takes time and it takes management, but it's well worth putting the effort into it because it will help your learners. Sometimes as well, I can get quite frustrated, especially with Moodle, in the lack of flexibility in it, because sometimes I'd like to make it look a bit better, but that can be difficult. Okay then, so open educational resources are resources that can be found on the web that are freely available and openly licensed, which you can use and adapt for a range of teaching purposes. Now this is very much part of the openness movement that we've seen on the web since its inception, and more and more you see universities offering MOOCs, or massively online open courses, I believe that stands for, where you get lots and lots of people participating in learning in their own time. Often you have resource exchanges where teachers can come together and share resources for free, hopefully, although a lot of sites where teachers exchange resources now have the option to monetize your resources as well. So for that one, you could think of like the Times Educational Supplements Resources Centre, which when I was a school teacher was an absolute godsend, because it meant that for the first time I could go online, search for what I wanted and find something I could download and maybe just tweak a bit to meet my purpose, which was fab. Okay, so some examples of open educational resources. TED-Ed is really quite cool. That is where you can embed a video and then put in interactive quizzes on top of it. You can also take the TED-Eds that other people have made and adapt them to your needs in much the same way you can as a Kahoot. You can create classes in there and it will track the assessment, it will show you who's watched the video, who's answered the questions, and then provides you with the feedback about who's done what and marks it for you as well. So it's pretty cool, and that's free. We have Khan Academy, which does something very similar, although this was geared up much more towards STEM. And then again, something like TESS resources, which is normally sharing of static resources like documents and textbooks and lesson plans. Okay, and there are many others that are suitable for things like vocational studies. So for example, JISC have a huge range of construction resources on their old Job Run platform, which are still available for their website, for their app store, which are all free. So there's lots of videos for things like health and safety in construction. Also, there is hairdressing.ac.uk, which is worth a look, which has a fully mapped out NVQ scheme for hairdressing at levels 2 and 3. And again, it contains lots and lots of instructional video, and then some questions as well, which can be put to learners. And all of those can be taken and embedded into a VLE for free to help provide that blended learning environment. So that is a very quick, I appreciate, overview of VLEs and open educational resources. Now, what I'd like you to do is to spend a little bit more time researching OERs this week, because next week we're going to spend time looking at individual tools inside of Moodle which can help with engagement and teaching and assessment. So what we're going to do this week, okay, is in your own specialist area, so whether that is ESOL or construction or hair or trying to think what else, we've got business studies. I'd like you to research open educational resources in your specialist area. So you can start with something like TED-Ed or Khan Academy or even YouTube and see what's out there, okay? And I'd like you to identify the resource, explain how you'd use it in a blended learning environment. So it might be that you might embed it into Moodle and then ask learners to complete a piece of work based on it. It could be that you're going to use it in class and then give learners some work based on it again. Could be you might want to use it in a flipped learning environment where you get students to complete the task before the lesson, and then when you come in you start questioning and assessment straight away, okay? Analyse using the SABA model the value of using these resources. So for example, with this, placing a handout into Moodle would be classed in its simplest form as substitution, because you no longer are giving it to them in paper, so it saves printing and you put it onto Moodle so they can access it for themselves. But going up through that model, actually you're adding value to that, because not only are they not having it on paper, they're getting to a point where you're encouraging independence, because learners can now access this resource as and when they want it, okay? And then after that, evaluate potential barriers to the success of using these resources in this approach. So for example, I know that we keep bringing up this factor of time again and again. So have a think about, are there any other barriers that would stop this approach from being successful?